South Sudan, Burundi, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo, among others, brought unparalleled knowledge, expertise, and gravitas to what we were doing. Aziz was a familiar name to everyone we encountered, either through personal interactions or by his reputation. For those of us fortunate enough to learn from his vast experience, it was a rare and invaluable opportunity. I think I would be amiss if I didn't say that if Aziz Pahad was standing here today, he would be extremely distraught about what we are seeing currently on our continent and in the world. We traveled many times to Sudan, to Khartoum, and Aziz led our meetings with many of the current protagonists in the conflict in Sudan, and I'm sure that he would be extremely distraught by what we are seeing in Sudan today. Palestine. We spent 10 days crisscrossing Palestine, the West Bank, Gaza, Nablus, and we had a series of meetings with the leadership of Fatah and the leadership of Hamas. We met there with Dr. Zahar, we met with Prime Minister Ania, and I have to say that Aziz Pahad was an extremely good listener. We also went to Syria at the start of the Syrian conflict, and there we met also with the leader of Hamas, Meshal, and we met with a delegation from Hezbollah who came through to Damascus, and we had very long meetings. Again, Aziz, his incisive mind and analytical mind and his keen sense of listening showed the kind of advice that he was giving to all of those that we met. He was talking about our experience in South Africa and how even on the eve of our elections, many people don't realize that on election day, the airport in Johannesburg was bombed. That downtown Johannesburg, there were bombs. And what people don't realize, that we ourselves as South Africans came very close to a civil war. And so these were the lessons that we went to impart to all of our colleagues. And I have to say, currently, what Aziz would say is, there's nobody in the current situation that we cannot sit down and talk to. And therefore, I think if ever we have to honor Aziz's life, what we should do is strive as hard as possible today to ensure that the war that we are seeing currently, the destruction that we are seeing today, and the carnage that we are witnessing today in Palestine and in other parts of the world comes to a stop, and that we get people back to the table to talk. He was a big believer in listening and talking. Beyond his diplomatic achievements, Aziz Pahad was known for his humility, as many have said, and approachability. He possessed a unique ability to bridge divides and forge connections with individuals from all walks of life. His warmth and compassion endeared him not only as an effective diplomat, but also as a cherished figure among those who had the privilege of knowing him. In addition to imparting lessons in international relations, Aziz Pahad also left us with profound teachings in humility, kindness, generosity, and the art of being a better human being. I fondly recall how, as Cecilia also mentioned earlier, during our travels, he never failed to share some fruit or something from the breakfast with our drivers. He would always say, take a fruit and let's give it to the driver. Through such simple gestures, he touched the lives of many and imparted invaluable lessons. As we reflect on the life of Aziz Pahad, we are reminded of the enduring legacy he leaves behind. He stood as a man of unwavering principles, committed to justice and equality. His contributions to South Africa's liberation and his diplomatic triumphs on the world stage will echo through the generations to come. While Aziz Pahad's passing is an immense loss, his spirit lives on in the hearts of those he inspired and in the positive transformations he helped bring about in the world. His legacy serves as a beacon of hope, underscoring the enduring power of dedication, diplomacy, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Aziz Pahad's life epitomized the values of resilience, compassion, and unwavering dedication. He was a hard worker. And I believe what Cecilia said, in the 10 days that we were in Palestine, where we had a number of meetings, and then we went over to Israel, and we had a number of meetings in Israel as well. We would get to bed very late in the night. Needless to say, Aziz always could endure a very late night. And that would go on till early hours of the morning, probably 2 o'clock in the morning. But every day, religiously, at 7 in the morning, Aziz would be at breakfast, having read the newspapers, and even more remarkably, the notes, the copious notes that Cecilia talked about. The next morning, Aziz would have highlighted everything in the paper. And I said to Aziz, between 2 o'clock in the morning and the time you get here, where did you find time to do all of this? And Aziz found time to do all of that. That was the kind of resilience that he had. His contributions to South Africa's struggle for freedom and his diplomatic accomplishments on the global stage will forever be etched in the annals of history. As we bid farewell to this remarkable statesman, let us honor his memory by persisting in our efforts to build a world guided by justice, equality, and peace. Aziz has made a huge contribution to our country. He has made a huge contribution to our continent and to our world. And I want to say on behalf of the trustees of Accord, Aziz has made a huge, huge contribution to our work at Accord. His legacy shines as a testament to the profound impact one individual can have on the lives of many. I thank you.
Thank you, Vosi. Welcome to Oliver Tambo Building. That's what you get when you come into this place. Of course, it's only in remembrance of Oliver Tambo that such rich review of where we come from, that today we can be able to have the discussions that we have, or what we have heard about Aziz. Anthony, I'm sure the leadership of DIRCO took note of the discussion document that you referred to. I think it will help in reintroducing it to our diplomats, current diplomats, just for them to be able to read, to understand where we come from, because in many cases when you watch local TV, there are many professors who say a lot of things as what they call commentators and other names, and quite often, unashamedly, maybe not deliberately, distort our foreign policy. So it is important for our diplomats to be able to revisit some of the basic documents of where we started so that we can be able to make sure that if as we continue to endeavor the professionalization of this department, we never lose our origins. I think also maybe at some point we'll need to have a discussion on this issue of the Council on Foreign Relations. I'm glad that you have raised it. It's important that we do so, because that's another forum that we need. Independent, but working very closely with government and South African society, as it was first conceived or suggested at the time when there was that discussion document that you referred to. What was attempted and the manner in which it phased out is something that Aziz continued to regret. But at the same time, I think it's something that we'll need to revive if we have to make sure that we have to protect our foreign policy, project it for what it is, so that it continues to serve our national interest. I will now call upon the choir to give us a musical item, and then we'll just read a few messages before we come to the next speakers. Choir, please. Thank you very much to the choir for the song. There are about 5 messages that have been received by the family, which I hope DIRCO will be able to circulate. I will just mention where they came from. They're quite short, but I might not want to read the contents of all of them because there's a possibility of doing injustice to some of them because they're not of the same length. Some of them, it can be easily to read them in a swipe, and others, one will have to pick the essence of the message. But all of them, there's something that goes through all of them. It's a real recognition of the role that Aziz Pahad played in fostering relations between South Africa and some of the people who have sent us these messages. We've got a message here from the Embassy of Palestine, obviously indicating the special relationship that they had with Aziz Pahad and the role that he played in promoting the cause of the Palestinian people. Part of what we have heard already from Vasu, even in terms of the initiatives that were taken. And then we have a message from the High Commission of Cyprus, again in the same vein, because Aziz Pahad was given the assignment to the one who coordinates relations with specific regions and countries, and therefore had this kind of special relationship with those countries and some of the embassies and ambassadors for different reasons. There's one from the High Commission of Cyprus, and then there's a message from a very short, sweet one, which I also want read from Vladimir Shubin. Vladimir Shubin was the main person who was coordinating the relationships between the ANC and the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The programs and support that we used to get from that country. He's got a very special relationship that developed with many other freedom fighters of the ANC. In fact, he knows people at that time more than anybody you can think of. And he recounts also the special relationship with the family and acknowledges the warmth that he had enjoyed from time to time when he visited, and the hospitality from Anjina and Aziz. Then we've got a message from Anand Singh, from the Indian Congress Party, who was also a minister at the time when Aziz was a minister, deputy minister at Foreign Affairs. He recounts that, and of course sends a message from Sonia Gandhi, who has expressed grief over Aziz's demise and expresses personal condolences to the family. And the last one is a message from the Basque region in Spain. Again, a very short, sweet one, to the family, expressing condolences about the death of Aziz and the excellent relations and the privilege of meetings that they've had with him over the period when he was a deputy minister. And of course underscore his commitment to the struggle of the people of Western Sahara, Ireland, or the Basque country, as a strong supporter of the peace process. Those are just about the few messages that we had received. It is now my privilege and honor to call upon two at first, before I come to the Dean, of the people that have had a close relationship with Aziz. As the co-program director has mentioned, at that time when Department of Foreign Affairs used to occupy the west wing of the Union building before relocating to here, the synergy and relationship that existed between the presidency and the Department of Foreign Affairs and the coordination of foreign policy and the excellent team that was built through those processes. Allow me to call upon Advocate Mujanku Gumbi, former special advisor to former President Mbeki and a family friend. She's also a chancellor somewhere. I don't know what that's.
Don't be jealous because you're not a chancellor.
I'm not educated like you. That's a problem.
Minister Pando and Deputy Minister, the Angina, my sister, and the institution, Sizanel, and members of the Diplomatic Corps, DG. Let me just stand on the protocol that has already been observed. I've never been a diplomat, so I may end up making mistakes. I used to ask President Mbeki, I told Aziz, just put in a good word for me to become an ambassador. So President Mbeki says to me, well, you know, Mujanku, you'll have to be very nice to the Minister of Foreign Affairs first, the DG, and you'll have to be very nice to the President, and I don't think you'll meet that test. So I was never appointed ambassador. Minister Pando, I'm still in the running. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just, and my DG is here, Ayandan Zaluba. I think I just want to talk about one or two things about Aziz. You know, I was allocated and sent on very difficult missions. And most of the time it was either with Aziz or Sydney Mufamad. And it, you know, I carried this weight, first of all, of Aziz. Aziz, who was very close to my boss, to President Mbeki. Aziz, who, I mean, just to step back a little, you know, President Mbeki, okay, English is not my first language. So I would say President Mbeki is a little private, Sizanele, a little shy as well. And, but you know, with Aziz, in the last few months when Aziz was sick, we were talking about it with Angina. He was at Aziz's bedside like twice a day. You know, he used all means necessary to get to Aziz's house, and I won't discuss them here because some of them sort of walk or parallel to what is required in terms of security. But he did everything possible to be by Aziz's side every day. And I really have never, that's why I say I understood the weight of working with Aziz, because I've never seen such a, profound brotherhood and friendship between Thabo Mbeki and Aziz Pahad, especially because President Mbeki, Sizanele, don't tell him I said this, he's a little bit of a coward. So, he doesn't like sick people. He always says that, I went to see Joe Modise and after that he passed to Mjango. And then I went to see Steve Chwete and after that he passed. So I'm not going to see people in hospital or who are sick. But he couldn't stay away from being with Aziz. I mean, there's just a strong bond. So I would be sent on these missions, and I'm just going to mention two for the sake of time. So we went to the US with President Mbeki. Aziz was not on that trip, Nkosazana was. And we met, I think it was with President Bush that time. And at the time, Israel had really gone through the usual blockade of the Palestinian territories. And complete blockade, no medicine, no food, no nothing. And Prime Minister Ariel Sharon was in Washington for a working visit. So President Mbeki says, but President Bush, this really punishment, collective punishment of innocent people is not the best thing. So President Bush says, okay, I'll arrange for you to meet Prime Minister Sharon this afternoon. So there we go. I think it was Ambassador Masikela, four of us or something, to meet Prime Minister Sharon. Needless to say, all I would say was that after that meeting, those of you who know me know I don't drink alcohol at all. So after that meeting, President Mbeki says to me, Mjango, I'm sure today you will also want a stiff one. When we went back to the hotel. But having failed, President Mbeki having failed to get through to Prime Minister Sharon, came back and decided I'm going to send my ace, Aziz Pahad, to Israel, to try and just to explain that, oppressed people would come back time and again. They would never give up. So, and the one thing that President Mbeki told me, most of you know I'm not from the ANC, but I respect this. He says, Mjango, President O.R. Tambo told us once that, we've been so angry with the South African regime, with the Afrikaners in South Africa, that one day when they send a genuine message that they want to talk, we will miss it. So I remember that all the time. I'm like, President Tambo was just such leadership out of that to say we must never ever miss that message that comes from the Boers that they are ready to talk because we've been so angry with them. So I said to Aziz, so President Mbeki comes back and says, no, Aziz, you're going to Israel. Maybe if you meet with the generals and the leadership, something will come out of it. And I get tagged along. Mjango, you're going with Aziz to Israel. So we get to Israel, very well received, and the meetings were going well with the politicians. Then we meet with the generals. And Aziz is managing this meeting very well. I'm really impressed. I'm like, this one knows what he's doing. Now, I'm an officer of the court. I'm a lawyer. So I'm taught to tell the truth. So I asked the generals in the meeting, I'm like, but tell me, the only reason you could treat people like that is if you think that they're not human. There must be something, that concept of othering, in order to justify what you are doing to them. And I'm telling you, after that, the meeting went south. And by the time we left that meeting, our cars, our protocol was withdrawn. And Aziz says to me, I'm never coming back to Israel with you again. And he never did. When he was appointed, I think with Zola Square, a special envoy for the Middle East, he came to me, he says, stay far away from me. I don't want to be involved in this. But I'm like, Aziz, but I was just telling the truth because, finally, people are going to have to talk and resolve their differences. The one other one is we go to Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, and things are really tough there. So that day is just President Mbeki and me in civilian clothes. Everyone is wearing fatigues, and there's war, and they block the communication, and terrible, terrible. The French say to us, don't come, because it's not safe, because they had taken over the airport in Cote d'Ivoire. And Nkosazana is like, no, Mr. President, you can't go to Cote d'Ivoire. The French foreign minister has told me there's no security and what. So President Mbeki is like, are we cancelling? I'm like, no, we are going. So we go to Cote d'Ivoire. Difficult day. In the middle of the day, President Mbeki speaks to President Chirac because the situation was really bad from Cote d'Ivoire. But the French soldiers did go ahead and kill some people outside Hotel Ivoire. But anyway, it was a very difficult, it's a long story, difficult time. So we come back and President Mbeki says, no, let me get my ace again, Aziz, to go to the Elysee and see whether we can make some progress on this. So somehow I get attached to Aziz again. So off we go. And I say to Aziz, we're going, because we really didn't have time, so we're going in and out to France. So we landed in the morning and left in the afternoon. And he never forgave me for that. He kept saying, Janko, you'll get to my age and you'll know what it does to fly overnight into Paris and then fly back the same day. Aziz tried his best. And you know, it didn't really land very well. As I say, I came to understand that, you know, when I work with Aziz, I'm working with President Mbeki. And it was President Mbeki used to say, if you guys go and mess up, used to say to Nkosazana, you'll come and fix. You don't go, just stay back. If Aziz and Mujanku mess up, and Sydney, of course, was always there. I would leave the American part to Sydney, the many missions, quiet missions we made to the US on Iran, Iraq, and the work that Aziz do, amazing work that he did to go to Iraq first, but I'm sure Sydney will talk about that. Sydney likes the Americans these days. Ambassador, you should take him with you to Washington. He's totally on your side. But you know, I just want to end really on the personal side. You know, Aziz was a friend. The program says, you know, Aziz was family. You know, my children, Tami and Kopano, loved Aziz just as much as they were so scared of Aesop. in equal measure. You know, they would be like, Ma, but, you know, Uncle Aesop, really, he would shout at them all the time. But they loved Aziz so much. So Foreign Affairs used to have an event at the end of the State of the Nation address, a party or dinner or something. So my son, when he was at university, was working part-time for his upkeep. I couldn't afford to keep him. So he was running the bar for this company that used to be the one running that Foreign Affairs gig. And so he said to me, I used to tell all my barmen that this is my uncle Aziz. He'll show them a picture. And that one will look after him. So every time Aziz ordered a double, they sent him a single. And then my son says, I'll be watching him, because my son would run the bar from behind, and I would watch him. And if I think Uncle Aziz is talking at the top of his voice, I would say to my staff that if he orders, even if it's a single or double, you just give him colored water. He won't know the difference. So, I mean, once my son finished university, came back, I told Aziz only that. He was so upset. He went to him, he's like, that explains it. That's why I never got drunk at those parties. Now, we know that at some stage, Aziz got very scared of the doctors who told him to stop drinking. So he stopped for a while. So a few months later, I see Aziz with a glass of red wine. I'm like, Aziz, didn't the doctor say you must stop drinking? He's like, oh, I changed doctors. You know, Aziz, Aziz used to tease me. I was not from the ANC. So one time, at some stage, my party, Azapo, had one member in parliament. So Aziz says, we have to investigate the Electoral Commission. How does Azapo get a seat when it has only 4 members? He says, it's Musala, Musibudi Mangena, Ambassador Rakwen, and you, Mujangu. How do you get a seat in parliament? But I got to understand the ANC more from Aziz than from my boss. Because Aziz says to me, Mujangu, the ANC is my life. He says, when I first kissed a girl, it was at an ANC youth retreat. When I first blacked out, it was at an ANC meeting. When I had my first heartbreak, it was this girl I was dating from the ANC. And he says to me, it's who I am, it's in my blood. So I'm saying this because, the last lunch we had, Angela, at home. So it's Isop, Meg, then me, Aziz, and Angela. Not the big one, the small one. So I said to Aziz, I'm here to recruit you. We must form a new political party. So he's like, okay, let's hear. So it's Isop who gives us the best advice. Isop says to Mujangu, you're wasting your time. We old people in the ANC want to die ANC, and we are going to die ANC. Forget about us. Go and try and recruit the young people. But Aziz says to me, no, let's talk about it, Mujangu. What do you have in mind? Aziz was really wonderful. He used to say to me, when the government bought this plane, the president's plane, Inkwazi, Aziz was just, sometimes he would say to Mujangu, please just tell President Beki that we have to go in advance to prepare for him and everything, because we couldn't get miles. He wanted to get air miles. And Aziz is like, traveling one in Kwazi, we're not getting any air miles. So, I'll put on my best straight face and say to President Beki, Mr. President, you can't just arrive in Moscow or Washington. We have to go ahead and prepare. And he will just look at me and say, Mujangu, the government spent money to buy this plane. You're all coming on it. And Aziz was really something else. But the last thing I want to say is that, at Zola Skoya's funeral, Aziz, I don't know who said it, to say, hey, Aziz, we're next. He's like, no, not me. There's a long list ahead of me. And he started listing him, John Chele, JJ, there's Meg, Ruth Mumpati, I think, was still alive, or who. He lists them. It's like all of the Aesop. He's sitting with him, says, Aesop must go before me. And then I would come. But really, Angela, I just want to say that, we really are better people for having known Aziz, for having walked by his side. And even as sad as it is that he's not with us, he will always be with us. We remember everything about Aziz. And in this time when, I keep getting reminded as I end with Antonio Gramsci's prison notebooks, when he says the old world is dying and the new is struggling to be born. It is a time for monsters. We see those monsters. And it is really sad that Aziz is not with us to try and deal with those monsters. But we can't give up. We have to face those monsters up front, and it is possible to have a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mujangu, for reminding us about those episodes with Aziz. Over the weekend, when I saw that the South African Zionist Federation and the Jewish Board of Deputies were having some festival somewhere, in Johannesburg and certain things were being said, it reminded me of Aziz, because these two organizations, there was a time when we had decided, under the instruction of Jesse Dorde, that we are going to engage them every fortnight, because we knew that they had a direct line to Prime Minister Netanyahu. How Aziz got to know this, and he said, if we have to convey any messages, let's engage these ones. And in the absence of that engagement, then of course we've seen whatever happened this weekend, which is a bit disgusting to say the least. Comrade Sydney, before you kick me, let me lead you to the...
You must show me where this thing is.
Yeah, it's just here.
Where?
Yeah,
What is here?
yeah, just talk.
Oh. Program Director and Room Keys, sorry, Welile Nhlapo. Same difference, yes. Professor Parek, Minister Pando, Sizanele, members of the Diplomatic Corps, ladies and gentlemen, I really am standing here to share my sadness, a sadness born out of incredulity. I'm finding it difficult to accept that Aziz is gone. I can't associate Aziz with death. Very, very difficult. Aziz came into my universe, at least from the point of view of knowing about him, some 45 years ago. At the time, we had established a trade union which was known as the General and Allied Workers Union. I was really in the formative stages of my activism then, drawn into the trenches by stalwarts of the ANC, the South African Communist Party, and SACTU, who came with the movement from the 50s. So they led us into forming this union. Very sentimental people. There were places where we could get very good offices. They really took us to an informal office space in Ferreira's town, Beckett Street. The name of the building was called Chancellor House. Those were the offices of Mandela and Tambo, and therefore they became the offices of our union. I then got shown a place in Beckett Street by one of these senior comrades, Rita Nzanga, and she said this was the home of Gulam and Amina Pahad. In later years, indeed, I saw Rita Nzanga appearing in some of the historical books with two little chaps carrying placards written, "Hands off our leaders." Those were Gulam and Amina's kids, Isup and Aziz. I never thought that one day I will get them to know them. I'll get to know them in the way I ultimately got to know them. Of the two kids, I first met Aziz, and then later I met Aesop. They were sort of a little bit older than me, 20 years difference. In the ANC, it's a little bit, because the ANC is not a ZAPO, it's an old organization. So, I meet Aziz. I need to talk about the circumstances in which we met. I know there are issues of time. I think our constitution will be tested to the limit. Given my age now, and the fact that I am currently living with some disability, my affirmative time will be taken full advantage of. So I met, there was a time before 1994, to be precise, about 43 years ago, maybe less, but certainly about 40 years ago, when the apartheid regime had unfolded a program of repression against the mass democratic movement. As at that time, we had 6,000 people in state of emergency detention. So, the leadership of the mass democratic movement met to try and work out what to do. And we came to some reading of the situation at the time. And we felt we wanted to share that with the ANC leadership in exile. I don't like this concept of exile, but that's what it was. So Mohammed Vali and myself traveled incognito to England to join up with other comrades from the MDM. I think it was Mr. Krobler who spoke about Mike Terry. Mike Terry picked us up from Heathrow Airport and drove us to some venue outside London, where we met an ANC delegation that was led by Alfred Nzo, Comrade Alfred Nzo. One of the people who were part of that delegation was Josiah Jelle. I'm mentioning him because I spoke to him yesterday to get permission to speak here. So Aziz was there. So we get to the meeting. We had written from the MDM what we thought was a very good paper analyzing the situation. But it became clear during the course of the discussion that we had brought to that meeting, us and them, divergent readings of the situation. The ANC delegation spoke first. I remember the opening sentence. It was, the imperialists are trying to create an impression that there is a stalemate in South Africa. And the main thrust of our argument in our own paper was that there is a stalemate in South Africa. Such was the impact of the repression that our movement was no longer making advances, although the other side was not succeeding to roll back our gains. So when I was talking to Joe Jelle yesterday, and I said, you remember that event? I was meeting Aziz for the first time. We brought divergent views to the meeting. He said, you call it divergent views? Beni Pais, Alapa. Beni Pais. You didn't know what you were talking about. But it was true that in the end, we deferred to their strategic reading of the situation, in which they were saying, in truth, the ANC has become the main motive force for everything that is happening in South Africa. We are not in parliament, but no parliamentary session will end without those chaps in parliament quarreling about the ANC. So Aziz was then tasked to present a paper in which he was talking about, the topic was inter-imperialist dynamics and the possibilities these dynamics give us. And Aziz was then arguing that in terms of his reading, we have possibilities to continue to build a strong resistance movement inside the country, and at the same time build a strong constituency abroad, including in what then he called the belly of the beast. So incisive was his analysis that you could feel that what he was giving is what nowadays is called a deep dive into the world historical moment at the time. So by the time we finished that particular session, they had succeeded to agitate us to go back home and fight. Because we could see the possibilities of taking the struggle forward. They were talking about the enemy, powerful, yes, underpinned by imperialism, yes. Take the war to the enemy. That's the language they were using. But they didn't tell us that they were talking to the other side at the same time. And of course, in later years, he said, how could we demobilize you? So in the evening, Aziz takes me out for a drink. That's where our drinking partnership started. So he takes me out for a drink. As we were drinking, we then start to discover that both of us grew up in the study circles of the same movement. He got to know what I knew about him And then, after a few glasses, you know, Aziz is likable, all these things that I hear people say. I've not heard anyone saying he was intellectually arrogant, which was one of his traits. But that comes out after a few glasses. So he says to me, now, Chief, you guys were telling us at the meeting that you understand the situation better because you are on the ground. When you are on the ground, which is well and good, you better know what it is that you are doing on the ground. Then I realized that Aziz can be arrogant. But then he seemed to realize that I was a bit hurt. You know, he hurt my ego then. So he decides to patronize me. He says, oh, yeah.
Do not.
Oh, sorry, man.
Just stand there.
Okay. So he says, Chief, you say you were born in 1959, a year before the ANC was banned. Where did you get this good politics of yours? So I said, let me hit back. I said, well, I did not have the misfortune of belonging to the youth movement. So I was taught good politics from the beginning. But I'm saying we got to know each other very well from that point onwards. We went our separate ways. The struggle continued. On a number of occasions when I had to go out on missions, sometimes I would bump into Aziz by organized accident. Sometimes it would be straightforward joint assignment. I met Aziz on one occasion in Amsterdam. I was part of a COSATU delegation which had gone there for a bilateral meetings, and we met also with Aziz, Joe Slovo, Kay Munsami, and John Gadimeng. Years later, someone spoke, I think Mr. Krobler, about the interest which the police had in Aziz. So years later, Mo Sheikh had infiltrated the special branch in Durban, as a result of which his unit laid its hands on some reports which were being written by a mole who was in COSATU. And this mole had written about this meeting we had in Amsterdam. Lists who was there and so on. Aziz was described as an Asian male in the report to the police. Then there were other reports by the same mole. So Mo and Mek Maharaj come to me. Mek was, of course, illegally in the country at the time. And they give me these reports and they say, we think we know who the mole is, but read these reports and tell us what your own deduction is. It was very simple because that person had attended several meetings. And in the end, that person from the COSATU side was the common denominator to all the meetings. And there was no other person who was the common denominator to all the meetings that were being reported on. So there was that interest, of course, by the special branch, understandably, on the movement. But Aziz was described in the way he was described, and there were other things that were said about him. Other sign of that interest was when Mr. de Klerk, after we came into government, came to me and said, I was then Minister for Safety and Security, there is someone who was an undercover agent for the South African police working in London. And this person has their fallout with the police. They are refusing to pay him for work done. Can you meet this person so that you hear if you can get the police to pay him? So I met the person, and that person was properly trained. He didn't give me much except some kind of headlines, a flavor of what he was doing. But he did say that one of his tasks was to surveil Aziz. So I tell Aziz. Now, Aziz does not respond in panic or anything like that because he was trained in other things. So he now becomes his professional self. He says, no, you know what? Tell the commissioner that before you can authorize that this chap be paid, they must give you all the reports he wrote so that you can determine whether their quality justifies that he be paid the amounts that he's asking for. Now you can work out what Aziz was doing. So that was Aziz. So the organization gets unbanned. We are now together in the country. Aziz remains my drinking partner, but there are others also now. That's why I'm saying I've lost one of my drinking partners. So there are others also who will remain nameless. They are too big to be named. So Aziz and Aesop cannot drive. On Fridays, the family expect them to join them for lunch. So I become the driver. I become the driver and get exposed to the luncheons, which Nelson Mandela and Oliver Tambo used to have on Fridays, Beckett Street. Those ones were cooked by Amina, the mother to Aesop and Aziz. So I was, in that sense, a big family friend. We drive around. Even as we are driving, the car is a study circle. We are debating issues in the car. On one occasion, we drove to Botswana. It was me, Aziz, Aesop. I have a sense of time, so I won't say President Mbeki. Thabo Mbeki then. So we are going to watch football in Botswana there. Then there was a big quarrel suddenly in the car. It's the siblings. I think I understood. You know, people keep on trying to understand why these two used to quarrel so much. One was born in 1939, the other was born in 1940, the interwar period. You know, where I come from, present-day Limpopo, children who were born during that period had names. My uncle was called Chiwandarani, meaning that this one was born during the time of scarcity. You know what wars do. So they were probably quarreling over rationing. They grew up quarreling during that period. So they would quarrel over anything and everything. So we are just listening as they are quarreling. And Aziz is one person who cannot be bullied. Someone was talking about expletives. And as Aziz will say, Fusek, you are not going to bully me, you. So I try to intervene. Aesop stops quarreling with Aziz. He quarrels with me now. What do you know? I'm old enough to be your mother. And Aziz comes back and says, what does his mother have to do with this? So we quarrel a bit with Aesop. Thabo is quiet. And when Thabo enters the fray, he says, Aesop and Sydney, this thing is simple. You are both right, man. So that is the life we led. We come into government. What do we call it? Two center, capital. This Cape Town, Pretoria. So Aziz says, no, in Pretoria we stay in your house. In Cape Town we stay in my house. So we cohabited. But his family was worried all the time about Aziz. And they really came to appreciate and like my closeness to Aziz. So they would say, you know, help this chap to get a life partner. So I say, Aesop, how do I do that? He says, no, he listens to you because of this wishy-washy diplomatic language you both speak. Talk to him. So Aziz would say, get me one then.
Just sorry, there's something here.
I didn't know that whilst I was accepting that contract to act as his talent scout, Mo Sheikh was also contracted to do the same job. So Mo Sheikh, well, I heard this being said by Professor Parek last week. Of course, I knew about it. I came to know about it later. Mo Sheikh brought Professor Parek and Aziz together. And when Professor Parek was saying, you know, he made an impression on me on the first day, I thought she was talking about my own impression of Aziz. Because that is what happened on my first encounter with Aziz. So she says, good impression, and so on. The very same day, I ended up driving him home, and so on. So they decide to get married. Moshe gets paid. And the payment is that he is the best man on the occasion. But Aziz had a very good sense of equity. I was paid the same, I was given the same reward even though I did not deliver. So both of us were joint best men. And we were guaranteed lifetime comradeship. Aziz, after that particular wedding, I bump into Mweleti Mbeki. So I say, Mweleti, I didn't see you at the wedding. Where were you? He says, which wedding? I tell him, he says, was Aziz getting married? So I said, yes. Then I report this to Aziz. Mweleti was not there. He says, if he thinks he'll attend my next wedding, he will be disappointed because this is my last wedding. There'll be no other. And he kept to that. He kept to that. My life partner and I were models that they looked at, Anjina and Aziz. But Anjina then recruits me. Recruits me to work for her at UJ. And Aziz had a theory. He says, you know that Anjina, she's domesticating you. She wants you to become, she overestimates your influence over me. So she wants to shape the nature of your influence over me because you are her subordinate. So you must be very careful. Let me leave those things now and talk a little bit of the serious things that Aziz and I did together. As Mijanko was saying, we would be posted to same missions, sometimes jointly, sometimes separately. But because we often lived together, we would always be thinking partners about the tasks that we were given. Some of these tasks, on the face of it, were difficult even to comprehend. But Aziz, I must say, had the intellectual temperament for these tasks. He had the personal proclivity for them. Consistent with what Oliver Tambo taught us, that if you want peace, he was saying this in the context of the problems we had then in Natal. If you want peace, you cannot bypass your opponent and get peace. We understood this to mean that when you are in the quest for peace, you don't only talk to your friends. I had been to missions with Aziz in which I got to meet Jonas Savimbi, Alfonso Dlakama, and we at the time did not succumb to the tyranny of the madman thesis that there are these people who are not amenable to persuasion, therefore don't talk to them. That's why Aziz found himself in Baghdad. We went to Washington to meet Richard Armitage, Condoleezza Rice, the neoconservatives, as they are called. We wanted to call out their Wilsonian idealism, the notion that it is correct to impose your notion of democracy on other people. Having Aziz with us was very useful because he had been to Baghdad. So we had very respectful discussions in the formal meeting. When they took us out for dinner, after 2 glasses, Aziz says, you guys, you know that you are talking rubbish, actually. Saddam Hussein has no weapons of mass destruction. I am from there, and you better tell that Colin Powell that he has no weapons of mass destruction. But the most important thing is that at that time, we were really advising them not to invade Iraq. They thought they were going to go in there for 3 months and come out having accomplished their mission. And we told them that we are going to get stuck in that quagmire for years. They went in and they suffered a massive strategic defeat. They suffered a massive strategic defeat, which they now admit to us was the case. So they had the privilege of listening to an Aziz Pahad who had the equipment of foresight, but they thought that we were a small country with no right to advise them.
Comrade Chinda, I just got a message from George.
Yes.
He says the minister is about to leave at some point.
Okay, I'm winding down. I'm
So
definitely winding down.
Don't tempt him to record.
Yes, I'm definitely winding down. So I said, we advised, we were not listened to. Right now, as I was saying earlier, Aziz is gone. He left us at a time when the world order is obviously in a state of flux. He leaves us at a moment when we need people of his type, people who are able to operate at the high level of political ideation to help us work out what needs to be done now. He would advise, I guess, that you can't solve the problem by trying to wipe out your interlocutor. This is an advice that currently we are trying to give to our Israeli friends as well as our friends in Palestine. And indeed, they are choosing to march. I heard the Sunday school politics that were being spoken in those marches about the one side being inherently evil and the other side being the side of angels. That is not the way to look at the problems the world is facing today. Mindful of the time, I am wrapping up now. I'm saying, pity, Comrade Aziz is gone. He lies in his final resting place alongside his brother Isup, West Park Cemetery. I am planning with my friends to visit Aziz. We intend to take the MTNA trophy, 8 trophy, to Aziz. I know that Aesop will look at us and say, you think you are champions? This is a fluke, man. So everything that we've known them for, they are continuing where they are.
Thank you.
And thank you.
You're lucky, Sydney, you meet me at my old age. You'd have moved from this stage running. I'm now going to call Ambassador Saleh Omar Abdu, the Ambassador of the State of Eritrea to South Africa and Dean of the Diplomatic Corps. I think I remember meeting you somewhere.
I think
some time back.
sometime back. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Program Director. I promise I won't compete with lunchtime. I promise I will be very, very brief. Good afternoon. Dr. Naledi Pandor, Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, Professor Anjina Pahad, Deputy Ministers present, DDGs, my friend, Executive Director of Accord, Mr. Van Vicker, family of the bereaved, friends of the family of the bereaved Aziz Pahad, members of Diplomatic Corps, Excellencies, Ambassadors and High Commissioners, distinguished guests, and fellow mourners. Permit me to extend our deepest condolences on behalf of the heads of mission, ambassadors and high commissioners represented in the Republic of South Africa on the passing of the former Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad. As a collective, we convene this day to honor and commemorate the life and legacy of the late Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad. The historical records of the Republic of South Africa bear witness to his enduring impact, which serves as evidence of life committed to the advancement of justice, diplomacy, and public service. Deputy Minister Pahad was not just a public figure. He was compassionate leader, those unwavering commitment to the betterment of the society left an indelible mark to all who had the privilege of knowing him. His journey was one of the resilience, courage, and tireless advocacy for the principles he held dear. Aziz Pahad served his country with distinction, navigating the complex landscape of politics and diplomacy with grace and intellect. As Deputy Minister, I believe he played a pivotal role in shaping post-apartheid Ministry of Foreign Affairs and subsequently the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. His passion for diplomacy was matched only by his dedication to the well-being of the people he served. Deputy Minister Aziz Pahad, an eminent figure in the struggle against apartheid, emerged as a prominent advocate for human rights, and social progress. His unwavering dedication was directed at fostering more promising trajectory for the people of South Africa, the African continent, and humanity at large. His contribution to peace negotiations in the